This is my drums track for or tracks for Haunted. I've got the all the audio that I comped together. I won't show you all of it, but it's I went through and comped through all the drums and then bounced it and then got the all the drum takes here. And then I've just hidden them so they're just there's I've still got all the tracks but they're just not in the way, so I can still focus on the rest of the track. Starting with the kick drum, I've got first an EQ compressor and a noise gate. I've got them on all the tracks because it just sort of sets the overall EQ and gets the right sort of tone of all the drums, and then the compressor and noise gate just sort of lifts all the drums and boosts them, and then the noise gate just sort of reduces any unwanted frequencies and things like that. So EQ for the bass, I've sort of taken out the mids here, and then sort of increasing the lows and then also the highs. The low is just because it's a kick drum; it's generally low in frequency, so the just having a slight boost on the lows just increases that low end and gives it more of a pump and a push and a bit more of a thud. And then increasing the highs a little bit just sort of gives it that attack from the beater. It just gets a bit of that attack in there. And then the mids just aren't, for a kick drum, are not really needed that much. It's mainly low end, and then you can boost some highs just for some attack. But the mids of the kick drum you can take out because actually that will get filled by the guitar and the keys and things. So actually, and sort of the snare and other parts of the drum kit. So for the kick drum, we don't really need that taking up the mids as well. I've got a compressor and a noise gate on as well. Um, I've got here kick drum, like reasonable compression, but not over the top. It just sort of boosts the kick drum and increases it in volume, and just gives it a bit more of a lift and a bit more kind of strength, and just increases the overall volume. And then I've got a noise gate as well, which is just sort of on tighten up just to remove any unwanted frequencies and low volume sounds and things. I've got a noise gate on sort of all of them, all on slightly different settings, but generally doing the same thing. So I won't go through a noise gate for um, every track, as it's all vaguely, it's the idea is all the same, just to remove any unwanted frequencies and just take all the bit of the grit and the dirt out, so then you can really hear the overall track. Because on one track, taking that out isn't too much of a big deal, but then when it all builds up, it can actually, you know, build up a lot in the track. So doing it on every single track means that you won't get that build up of sort of low volume sounds. Then also on the kick drum, we've got an envelope, just sort of adding more punch is what it's set, and it's just sort of adds a bit more attack, and then holds it, has a hold, and then a bit more release. What this does is it sort of adds an attack, but it just gives the kick drum a bit more oomph, and just a bit more kind of, it just rounds it out, makes it just sound a bit more like a low end kick drum, a bit more of a thud, which I think is good. I also have a Fat FX on it, just on booster. Right, it's quite low. This is sort of the higher you get, it's sort of more. It gets sort of the higher frequencies, and then the more lower you get, it's more of the lower frequencies. We've got the bass enhancer here, just sort of warming up the kick. And then we've also just got a sort of a compressor to increase the volume and things. And it just what it does, it's just sort of boosting that bass and really giving the kick some character to it, sort of defining the sound of the kick drum. And then I've got here is a match EQ, just sort of to. I've got this here just right at the end. I know you wouldn't normally. It's not, not typical to have it there at the end, but it's just sort of connecting all of this, all of these plugins, and just sort of, overall just putting the sound together is kind of the idea of what it's doing. Just sort of shaping the overall sound with all these effects on. And I've done the same for the snare and the toms as well. I don't believe, yeah, no. So it's the snare and the toms. It's sort of the same idea, just and that match EQ at the end, just to sort of connect all the plugins and just round out the overall. I haven't done it for the floor tom, the rack tom as well, just to round out sort of the overall sound and define it a bit. It's kind of the idea of what I was going for. And then on the snare, we've got the same EQ compressor and thing. I'll just show you. What this sort of reducing the lows as that's not really needed, and then sort of getting a little boost here to get sort of more fatness and a bit more bass into the snare, and reducing some of the mids, and then increasing the higher levels. So you've got sort of a combination of the high end where the high frequencies of sort of the attack, and then sort of a bit of the lower frequencies to add sort of fatness and a bit of bass and stuff into the snare, and that sort of combines together. And then slight reduce of the mids is sort of where all the sort of the snare fuzz and stuff would be. So just getting rid of some of that to really get the overall sound of the snare. Then we've got a compressor here. Just it's on drum room. Although I feel what it's on drum room purely because it's sort of having it as a room kind of gives a snare sort of an open kind of feel. It's sort of like it's not too harsh compression, um, with a fairly softer knee, but it allows the snare to kind of have some space to excuse me, to breathe and gives the snare some openness to it, which is what I liked about adding that. Um, and then we've got a noise gate here like before, just removing sounds and things. I've got an envelope as well on the snare, just adding more attack. You can see there's the peak here, for the attack, and then goes for the release. Basically, this just all adds more of a snap and a sort of a crack to that snare drum, and increases the attack of it. And it really, gives the snare drum that crack that you want when listening to the track. I did add a Fat FX as well to the snare drum and had it on enhancer, but when I listened back to it and things, it actually added sort of generally there was too much bass on the whole drum kit, and the snare was just too bassy because the enhancer, because it's low down here, there's a lot of bass enhancement going on, and actually I wanted more higher resonance from the snare, so I actually took that off the snare. And then I've got a match EQ as well, like I said before, just to sort of round out the overall sound and sort of set the tone for the drum, with all these sort of effects on it. Now we've got the toms, which are fairly similar. We've got EQ compression, just sort of high EQ, just sort of basically boosting where the tom would sit, and then just sort of a compressor, just sort of a bit of compression, just to tighten up the sound and things. And then a noise gate, but like I said before, removing frequencies and things. Basically, I haven't really done a lot to either floor tom or rack tom, but basically the idea is just sort of increase the volume and things and tighten it up using the EQ here, and then sort of set the tone for the EQ. Like here we've got a bit of the bass boost, removing some of the mids, and then some slight high frequencies there. That will bleed into the whole drum. and removing the mids is sort of like to give the rest of the track some space, so the floor tom isn't sitting in the mids where it doesn't need to be. But yeah, sort of the idea is just sort of setting a nice tone using the EQ for the toms, and then just sort of cleaning up the track and things. I added a Fat FX on the floor tom as well, just to increase that bass. But when listening to all of it, with the kick, the snare, the toms, and everything, there was just I think that was just too much bass, and I needed more of the high frequency. So I decided to take that off in the end. But originally I thought it was a good idea. But then then after listening to it on speakers, I actually decided that there was too much bass. I've also done, panned the rack toms. I panned it in the idea of from a drummer's point of view, so where the drummer will sit. So you've got the rack toms on the left, the floor tom to your right, and then it's the same with the overheads and the room mics as well. Um, and then with the overheads, I've left them pretty natural. Just doing EQ, compressor, and noise gate. The EQ just sort of boosting up the higher frequencies, and it's the same for this one as well. And then the room mics, I've done a few more, but the overheads I've left pretty clean because I like having the natural sound. I don't want to affect, because obviously the room mics are picking up a lot of everything. I don't want to affect the whole tone of the drum kit, so I've left them pretty natural in how they sound because I think it sounds good and I like it like that. But we've got moving on to the room mics. Got EQ, compressor, noise gate. The EQ is the same for both, just sort of increasing a bit at the low end, where sort of the kick would be. It's on a refresh snare. Is that one the same? They're both the same. The reason I've done this is because it keeps the high ends, increases the highs from where the cymbals and stuff would be, which is good. But it also adds a bit of bass as well from like the kick, which I think is because obviously the room mics are picking up everything. So I think it's good just to increase the bass and stuff as well, as well as sort of the highs and the cymbals and things. So that's why that's like that. And then compression, it's on a rock snare bottom. It's sort of light compression, not too harsh. Um, it's not over the top, but it just sort of adds. It kind of tightens up the track, but then just gives the snare a bit of a subtle, because it's only the bottom snare. It just gives the snare a subtle sort of boost and allows the snare just to come through that a little bit more, and which I think is nice for the room mics. And then we've got I added a Fat FX like I did on the other drums, but they like I said before, there was just way too much bass generally in the overall tracks, and it just sounded a little bit weird. So I decided to take it off. And then I've got a spreader here on a drummer enhancer. It's just high intensity, high in the mix. It's just sort of increasing the overall sound of the room mics, and really sort of sort of rounding out the room mic and giving it sort of an overall tone and sound together, and just kind of really really creating the whole, and boosting the sound of the drum room, because the drum room, having the drum room, like what I did, I did a mono recording, but I decided um to double it, to duplicate and then pan them, so it gives sort of a wider spectrum to the drums, and it allows for the drums to have more space. I think the spreader does allow that as well. Just gives the drums more openness and more sort of space to move about and gives some more atmosphere to the drums, which I think is good. I was thinking about actually sampling because I have sort of each drum sort of recorded individually and things. So I was thinking about going to create a sample drum track, and add it combined with the actual audio as well. But I'm not going to do that now, partly because I don't want to spend. I haven't totally like got. I don't totally have the understanding of sampling yet. I have done it before, but I need to just do some research and practice and just sort of remember how to do all the sampling stuff. I'd probably use Alchemy on Logic because I know that's quite a good sampler. But I'm not going to do that now because I know I could spend quite a lot of time doing that and then totally forget about doing the rest of the track, which I know I need to do. As I still need to edit all of these. But I do know I don't know if I'll do it for all the tracks, but I know for Haunted, I will. I think I will definitely uh, sample it because I know, like I mentioned for Even If I Tried, because I know I said I would sample that as well, but because those are sort of, I feel like the drums are a little bit messy for those two tracks, whereas when I edited Am I Wrong and Definition of I, the tracks are just a little bit tighter and the cymbals are just a little bit more together. So I think I know I would like to in the future definitely add samples to these, but whether I will have time to do it for this project while focusing on everything else as well, I don't know. I'll have to see when I once I've sort of done the rest of the track and sort of seen where everything is. But apart from that, that is that is what I've done to the drums.